otherwise known as Elly Griffiths. Hello, Elly.
Hi, Alex. Lovely to be here.
And congratulations on winning the Edgar yesterday.
Oh my goodness, it was so exciting. I knew that the Edgars were yesterday, but I thought they were going to be in the evening. So I was just sitting in my shed. I've got this shed at the top of the garden where I write, and I was just sitting there, and suddenly my phone started kind of vibrating because people were trying to contact me, and I ignored it for a bit because I thought, what do they want? And then they were saying I'd won the Edgar, so it was so amazing. It was amazing, incredible. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah. How do you think your narrator in the your sequel to Postscript Murders helped you win that?
Yeah, well,
Because I think that was brilliant, really.
I thought the narration for The Stranger Diaries was so good, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Loved it in the audiobook.
And it was the first time I've ever had an audiobook that was like with a cast rather than just one character. So it was when I normally I feel a little bit, I don't know why, I feel a little bit nervous about listening to the audio, but when I listened to that, it was just great. It was like a play, and I was super excited because the man who reads the part of the stranger really is Adam from The Archers. So I was really excited by that.
Yeah, I could tell you're a big fan of the Archers from the Ruth books, of course, because they must be in nearly every book.
Yeah, I do love the Archers. Well, I don't know. I suppose like a lot of Archers fans, I know Leslie Thompson is another one. I kind of have a bit of a love-hate relationship with them and there's a bit in The Stranger Diaries where the Archers is on and the daughter says, "Oh, please turn it off." And my husband's a bit like that with it. But, because all the men always sound terribly tired. It's sort of like, "Oh, I've just been milking the cows." And always the women sound really stressed. Oh, I've just been making a cake. So I must admit, I sort of hate them and I sort of love them at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So what's the plans in the Postscript Murders for the sequel?
Well, so Postscript Murders, it's not exactly a sequel, but it does have Harbinder Kaur in it, who was she was she was the detective in The Stranger Diaries. And I was really pleased that people liked her because she was quite a prickly character, I suppose, quite a difficult character. She doesn't suffer fools gladly, that phrase that people always use about people who are a bit difficult, and she's quite she says what she thinks and things like that. So I was pleased that people liked her. So she appears again in the Postscript Murders. But the Postscript Murders, it's set in the same part of England as Stranger Diaries in West Sussex. And the idea really came to me because my Aunt Marge, now I've got an aunt called Marge, who is a big influence on me because she lived in Norfolk and she, helped me with a lot of the stories behind some of the Ruth books. And she's got a boat, so I've been on her boat and we explored the Broads for the Janus Stone and things like that. Anyhow, Marge has recently moved to Seaford, which is on the coast near me. And something about moving, I don't know what it was, the move. I can only say it's made Marge kind of obsessed with murder. And she keeps ringing me up. She rings every night at about 6, and she rings up, and I always know it's her because there are not many people who use your landline. So you're on the phone, and she says, "Oh, love," she says, "I've just got a really good idea for a murder." And you think, "Oh, okay, Marge." But really, she does. So and the other day she rang up on Sunday, and she said, "Oh, love," she said, "I've just seen a vicar." And I thought, oh, well, maybe poisoned incense. And so the starting point for the Postscript Murders is that there is an elderly lady living in sheltered accommodation on the south coast, but her job is she's a murder consultant, and she's consulted on murder. So that's where the whole thing starts.
A bit Miss Marpley then.
Well, a little bit, and a part of the sort of storyline is a bit like, I think, with Agatha Christie and Miss Marple is just don't overlook elderly ladies. because
Yeah.
that they see all and they know all, and it's a bit sort of Peggy, who is the elderly lady in my book, says, "Oh, I can make myself invisible because any old person can do that," and people do kind of ignore them. But the message of my book is don't do that.
Yeah, your characters got a great following, and none better than your resident druid, of course.
Yeah, Cathbad. Do you like Cathbad?
I do, yes, indeed, yes. He's one of my favourites.
He I don't really know where he came from in a way, and I've been reading on my Elly Griffiths page. I've been reading my first book, The Crossing Places, aloud. It's been really good fun actually. I've been reading it aloud, and I was struck by how sinister Cathbad seems in that book. Because I'm on book 13 now, I'm writing book 13, and he's become kind of a friend, and he's a druid, and he always turns up at the moment when he's most needed, and he has a sixth sense. But I think by 13 we think of that as quite sort of cozy, but in the first book it's quite sinister. So I was struck by how I don't think it's him that's changed really. I think it's just our perception of him has changed a little bit, and something that seemed a bit sinister in the first book is now kind of quite familiar. But yes, Cathbad is a druid. He The idea really came to me because the first book in the Ruth series, The Crossing Places, starts with this henge, and which was a real thing. There was a Bronze Age henge found in North Norfolk, and when the archaeologists tried to take the timbers away to the museum, local druids did protest, and I thought only in Norfolk would you have local druids, and so Cathbad really came from there. But yeah, I'm glad you like him. He's become an integral part of the books, I guess.
The arc and the change in him, and Max Mephisto too, how you managed to change it in the last one in the series, because you took that on 10 years. What's that like, moving a book and taking it on such a large gap between one and the previous?
It was really interesting. Here's that one. Now you see them. I did come prepared with that one. Yeah, it was quite a challenge, but actually it was very interesting to me. So it's book 5 in that series, and the first 4 are set in the 50s, and this one, as you say, it takes it forward 10 years to 1964. And there were a couple of reasons for that, really, but one of them was, I don't want to give too much away, but at the end of book 4, 2 of the characters get together. And I didn't really want to write about that lovely time, just when you get together and you get married and it's all lovely. I kind of wanted to write about what happens 10 years on, when maybe you still love each other, but there are a lot of stresses. And, the life of women in 1964 wasn't all sort of, freedom and peace and joy. You were still really expected to give up work when you got married, and that's what happens to Emma, the detective in my book. So I wanted to write about that frustration, really. But of course, the another reason for setting it in 64 is it's set in Brighton, and of course in Brighton in 1964 you have that famous battle with the mods and rockers, and I wanted to write about that.
Yeah, I found that really interesting, because when you moved it on so much, you had to come up with new elements for the characters. What was that like?
Well, it was quite, as I say, it was a challenge, but I really liked it, because I suppose also you want to keep yourself interested as the writer, really, don't you? And I've been writing 2 books a year, a Ruth book, and then either a Stevens and Mephisto or a standalone. And you just want to keep yourself interested, and that was a challenge for me that kept me interested. You're thinking, well, what's it like for Max? He's been in America for 10 years and now he's back. What's happened to his life in that time? What's happened to Ruby, who is now a huge TV star, because TV is now a thing, and particularly what's happened to Edgar and Emma, because Emma was the brains of the operation, and since I'm giving away a little bit, but since she's got married and had children, she is now left out of all the investigations. And I wanted to write about what that was like, really, and it's not that long ago. I was born in 63. I nearly set the book in 63, but I thought '64 was better because the mods and rockers, but it's not that long ago. But I know from William Shaw's brilliant book set in the '60s that women police officers, we call them police women then, women police officers weren't even allowed to drive cars until the 1970s. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ruth and Nelson have changed a lot over the 13 books, and I noticed there's a romantic theme between all your books, and I just thought that maybe that could one of the things I've been asked to ask you is what's going to happen between them, because everyone loves those two as the characters, really.
Oh, I couldn't possibly tell you what's going to happen, but yeah, I think as you know, my first 4 books, which were written under my real name, were kind of romances. I guess you'd sort of call them women's fiction, but there is an element of romance, and it's always struck me that romance is quite like crime, because in romance you're trying to hide the identity of Mr. Right or Ms. Right, but in a crime novel, obviously you're trying to hide the identity of the murderer. So in a way, there's a similar thing going on. You've got misdirection, you've got clues, you've got all that stuff. So it is a bit similar. So I have noticed, as you mentioned, that all my books do seem to have this romance theme going through it, and I like that for the same reason that I like crime, because you can lay clues, you can take people down sort of blind alleys and things like that. But when I started the series, the Ruth series, the first one, the Crossing Places, I didn't even know there'd be a sequel. I only had a 1-book deal, so I didn't know there'd be another one. So I kind of hoped there'd be another one, and I suppose there are sort of clues in there about the other ones. But I hadn't thought that way ahead. But in a way, that's the great thing about writing such a long series. So as I say, I'm writing book 13 now, and that's nearly 13 years in their lives. So if you're doing a standalone, somebody has a baby, say, and that's it, that's the end. But if you're writing a series, well, that baby has to grow up, and there are complications. So I had not thought my way through all the complications. Having said that, I think, know what's going to happen at the end now.
Oh, you've got us all intrigued there, I think. Yeah.
But I couldn't possibly tell you.
To be honest, I'm quite relieved you can't, because with the level of books I read, I've only got to number 8. There'll be more people in the audience that have read more than I have.
Yeah, you've got a way to go.
Yes. The Ruth and all the characters in there, with how much the series has changed, and of course you just moved Ruth into a new location. Where do you think that'll take it?
Well, yeah, so that's in book 12, the Lantern Men. So that starts with Ruth, as you say, in a different place, in a different place in her life, really. I wanted to do that a bit like I said earlier on, partly because it keeps it very interesting for me if I do that. But also, I wanted to focus a little bit on Ruth's career. And in book 13, you see a bit of a focus on her career, because her romance is not the only thing in her life, and it's not the only thing that's going to be moving her forward. So I wanted to focus a little bit on that. But having said that, I don't want to give too much away because you're already on book 8. But she's moved away from Norfolk in book 12, but the lure of the marshes, let's just say, and the lure of Nelson is very strong. So that's all I'm going to say.
I've always been very intrigued, and I do like to read 2 a year, so I can keep up.
Well, you do pretty well.
Yeah. I'm just curious as to how you managed to write so many series at once, because of course now you're writing YA as well, because you're reading that on your site, aren't you, at the minute? So yeah.
It's I suppose it's middle. They call it middle grade rather than YA because it's a bit younger. It's for ages 8+. I've got a copy of that. Look, there it is. A Girl Called Justice, and that's for sort of ages 8+. And I'm reading this one aloud on my Facebook page at the moment. Well, yeah. So I have been writing 2 books a year, and last year, the year before, I did 3 because I did A Girl Called Justice. And there was a really interesting chat on the UK crime book group today, actually, about writers who write about 4 or 5 a year, you know, and I think it all just depends on the writer, really. For me, 2 a year is kind of doable. I couldn't do more, I don't think, and I don't want to write 2 a year forever. But in some ways, it kind of helps because when I'm writing a Ruth book, I often think, oh, I wish I was in the 50s with Stevens and Mephisto. Or if I'm writing a Stevens and Mephisto book, actually, they're called the Brighton Murders now, I must remember. And that's good because Stevens and Mephisto, I couldn't really abbreviate to S&M, could I? So anyhow, have you read my S&M book? You'd love it. Or maybe I should have. Maybe I should have said that. So writing Stevens and Mephisto book, I think, oh, I wish I was with Ruth. So it kind of keeps it fresh for me, really. But I can't write 2 at a time. I have to write one and then the next one. At the moment, I'm trying to do a little bit differently. So I'm writing Ruth 13, and I'm writing the 3rd book in my children's series because the 2nd book's out in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm doing one in the morning and one in the afternoon, which is a tip that William Shaw gave me. And I'm not sure how he keeps it straight in his head, but I'm finding it a bit hard.
What was your inspiration for the younger book?
Well, really, it was my mum. So my mum was the daughter of a musical comedian in Variety. So he was the inspiration. My granddad, it was called Dennis Laws. He was the inspiration for the Stevens and Mephisto books, you know, about theatre, because that was his life. He travelled around the country and he brought my mum up, so which was very unusual at the time that she was from a sort of single parent family. But eventually he had to send her away to boarding school because, you know, she had to go to school. So she went to boarding school age 12 and, you know, and she hated it because her life had been, you know, she didn't know anyone her own age. Her friends were sword swallowers and magicians and, ventriloquists and things like that. And chorus girls. So she really found school difficult. Eventually, she made lots of good friends there. But when she was there, she used to write, and this must be where I've got any ability that I've got from. She used to write these little crime novels about a girl called Nan Laws. Her name was Sheila Nan Laws. So really, the character of Justice in the Justice books is based on my mum, because Justice goes to school for the first time, age 12. And she goes to boarding school and she doesn't like it. But Justice is obsessed with murder and detective stories. And luckily for her, there's a murder to find. But there's one kind of spooky thing that I'd like to tell you about that, because so my mum wrote these stories about a girl called Nan Laws. And when the books first came out, when the publishers first sent me the cover of the Justice books, look how lovely it is. I said to them, it's really lovely. I'd really like to write a letter to the artist to thank them. And my publisher said, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. She's an American woman. She's called Nan Lawson. So it's almost the same name.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
That is one hell of a coincidence, isn't it?
Because Nan is quite an unusual name for a young woman, I think.
Yeah. I know that you've written a lot of things, but the most fun thing must have been to write for Theakston's, I imagine, when you did this. Yeah.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, when I chaired Theakston's Crime, was it 2016, Alex, or was it 2017? 2017.
I think it was 16 because I was on the winning table, wasn't I? If you remember.
You were. So
yeah.
When I chaired the Theakston's in Theakston's Crime Writing Festival, which was a huge honour, one of the things the chair gets to do is to write the after dinner murder mystery. And of course, it's terribly stressful because not only are there all these writers in the room, because every table has a writer at it, but of course, there are all these people who are reviewers like Alex and bloggers and people like that who know lots about crime. So my little play, I kind of went a bit for humour, and it was about an archaeological thing. And I'd got Francis Pryor to come along, the archaeologist. That was a really, really thrill for me, really. But I'd gone a bit for comedy, so I had a character called Donald Trumpington, and he was played by the Irish writer Steve Kavanagh, who, if you can imagine Steve Kavanagh in a blonde wig with an American accent. There's a brilliant Brighton crime writer called Simon Toyne, and he was this aristocrat. And Alexandra Benedict is very glamorous. She was this Swedish archaeologist, and wonderful Natasha Cooper was the clairvoyant. So we just had so much fun. But your table guessed it, Alex, didn't? So you won.
Yeah, we were very lucky to have the help of Ruth Ware on the table.
Oh,
yeah.
Ruth is great. But the thing is, isn't it, the next year, I was at a table and I was at your table, wasn't I?
Yeah.
And you got the murderer and we didn't
did.
listen to you.
Yes, it's very difficult to put your ideas across when you're around the table full of people, isn't it?
It is, and we should have listened to you. So I'm really sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah, that's fine. It was fun.
You couldn't have won 2 years in a row. It would have looked
No, I would have had to give it to someone else, I think. I would have felt guilty. What I know that you were supposed to be involved in this year's Theakston's as well as one of the special guests. What has that done to your year with that not being around now?
Well, I must admit, it is one of the big things that I'm sad about this year. You know, every single person in the country or maybe even the world is missing things at the moment, aren't they? And I should have been in America at the moment for the Edgars. But in a way, for all writers, I don't know, for me, certainly, Harrogate is like the focus of the year. You look forward to it and, you know, you're planning it. And it doesn't matter whether you're appearing or not. I was lucky enough to get a slot this year, but it doesn't matter really. You just want to be there. You want to go to all the events, you want to go to the dinner, you want to see your friends. And, you know, when that was, I knew it would be cancelled, but when it was, I just thought, oh, you know, it really was a sad feeling, you know, partly just because not seeing all your friends, you know, but we'll just have to get together next year, won't we?
Yeah, 6 years in a row it would have been if I'd made it this year.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably similar for me, actually. We might have started coming at the same time then. Yeah, and it's so special, isn't it? There's such a special atmosphere to it.
It definitely is. I put my whole year around it. I reviewed specifically for that.
Yeah.
And then bloody Scotland afterwards, which is, of course, not there either. It's a big shame.
It is a big shame. You know, we're lucky, really, aren't we, in the crime writing world, because there are so many things to do. But yes, but this is why this is so great, isn't it? And events like this, because at least we're able to talk to each other and, you know, talk to the wider community. So that's nice.
What kind of things have you been talking about with the wider community while you've been in lockdown?
Well, we all have our sort of chats, and you know, I've got my sort of a lot of crime writing friends, but particularly my local friends like Leslie Thompson and William Shaw. We've kept in touch and we chat quite a bit. I mean, we chat like everyone in this time. We chat about food and you know what we're going to be doing that day and TV we're watching and things. But we also do talk about work, and I think it was quite difficult at first because we didn't know. I don't think we all knew whether we'd be able to work through this. But I think that's where having a deadline is good. And I know Leslie has got a book out next week and William's got one out the week after that. So we've all had deadlines. So we've had to work, really. And as I said in the beginning, I've got this shed. This is where it is, shed. It's at the top of my garden. And to be honest with you, it's quite nice to have somewhere to escape to. Because, you know, I'm very lucky because I've got my husband and my 2 grown-up children home. We're all in the house together, which is lovely. But, you know, you need to escape sometimes. And when my husband says, oh, shall we do a big spring clean of the bathroom? I say, oh, what a shame. I've got to go and ride.
No cat in front of the camera today because
no, he's not here. He's not here at the moment. He does spend a lot of time in the shed with me. And one last time I did a thing for again, I think it was on William's Facebook page. The cat just stood in front of it. And one of my readings when I was reading from the Crossing Places, Gus, that's my cat. just stood in front of the camera, and I couldn't even move him. And he's black, so it just went totally black. But he's not here at the moment. I think he must think it's his supper time, so he's down at the house nagging people, I should imagine.
What does he do to keep himself occupied? Because of course he sits with you while you're writing, doesn't he?
He does. I mean, he does sleep a lot. Cats sleep 16 hours a day, don't they? But the thing about cats is, the really weird thing, isn't it, is, I don't know, do you have cats, Alex?
I've got a dog at home. Well, it's my mum and dad's dog, but yeah.
Oh, nice.
I look after him when I can.
So you know what pets are like. So
I do, yeah.
When he wants something, I just know that he's staring at me. You know, even he sits behind me, so there's a chair there, and I just know that he's staring at me, and that, you know, he wants something from me. So yes, so when he wants something, he gets up here. Yesterday, he got up on the desk and stood on my keyboard. I mean, how he did it, but all my writing disappeared, and it was replaced by this big number 2. I don't even know how you do that. I mean, luckily I was backing it up as I went along, but I don't know how he managed that. Or he'll sort of walk round the back and he'll knock things over. And I've normally got a glass of water here, and he'll knock that over, or he'll drink from it, which is another of his horrid tricks. So he knows how to get my attention, yeah. But I wouldn't be without him. He's lovely. Was
he the inspiration for Ruth's cats?
Yes, yes, I would say so. I love cats. I love dogs too. Obviously, as a dog virus, and I grew up with dogs. My parents always had dogs. Yes, he was really, and the way Flint, Ruth's cat, behaves is very much the way Gus behaves. You know, he wants attention, and Ruth knows, you know, what he wants, sort of psychopathically, you know. So, do I mean psychopathically? I don't mean that, don't I? Psychically, she knows what he means. Yeah. So, and Ruth had another cat, Sparky, who was based on a cat I once had called Sparky. So, I do really like writing about animals. My editor often tries to tone down the animal stuff, and I'll say something like, in the manuscript, I'll say something like, oh, you know, Flint was feeling bored, and Jane, my editor, who's wonderful.
Oh, Elly's gone. Bizarrely.
Are you okay still?
Yeah, but Elly's gone. So we'll try and get Elly back when we can. Yeah. We'll try and get Elly back when we can. The first Elly book, The Crossing Places, was one of the ones I
Sorry, Alex, I disappeared.
Don't worry about it. I was just telling them when I was reading The Crossing Places for the first time.
Great, go
on. I read The Crossing Places after you chaired in 2016, and I think it was your 6th book. So Crossing Places was actually the 2nd book I read. So it was weird because of course Dad was a completely different character by then. So
yes,
because what you were saying about how dark he is in number 1.
Yes.
Compared to number 6, yeah.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it, how that happens? And I think it's probably only half of it is, I don't know, I think part of it is that we just get used to characters, don't we? And characters that we think, you know, initially would think, well, that's very strange. You know, we end up thinking, oh no, that's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, Nelson's relationships as well, the way they've changed. I mean, his family and the children and all the characters. It's the characters that keep me reading them, I think.
Now listen, excuse me for a second. The cat wants to come in. He's meowing. Hold on a second.
Don't worry about it. Let him in.
Yeah. Darcy, come in. We're talking about you. Come on. He's in. Yes, well, with Nelson as well. You know, I wanted to make his wife, Michelle. You know, when Ruth first sees Michelle, she thinks she's the sort of typical trophy wife. She's very attractive. She cares about her appearance, all things maybe that Ruth doesn't do. But but I wanted to make her more than that. So I think as the books have gone on, it's been quite nice to be able to make more of the character of Michelle. And she's gone through quite a lot of things. It doesn't stop some people, and sometimes my dearest friends, saying to me, "Why don't you just kill Michelle?" But I think we've got to feel for Michelle because she has quite a difficult time.
Would you ever kill one of the big characters, or are you too attached to them?
In theory, I would. I did kill a major character in one of the books. You haven't got there yet, so I won't say who.
No.
And I did. In theory, I've always said, I would kill one of them, but I actually did find it quite upsetting to kill this particular character. In theory, yes, but in practice, to be honest with you, I wouldn't kill Ruth. Say, I just couldn't do that.
Yeah, it'd be so difficult, wouldn't it?
It would be really difficult. And
yeah.
you have a relationship with your characters, and not just that, because they do take on and other people have a relationship with them too. I mean, I'm not saying that's a reason for not doing that, but I think I would, to be honest with you, find that too difficult. I'm not against major characters dying. I think that's, sometimes great when writers can do that. When that happens in Game of Thrones, you think, my gosh, Sean Bean, don't want to give things away, but is he going to die? And then when people do die, it's like life, isn't it, really? But
yeah.
I don't think I could do that to Ruth.
No, I'm fascinated by how characters age, because of course, you said on All You Sure about your latest Mephisto being in a retirement home, the one that you're going on to. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I've got ideas for the next Stevenson Mephisto, which will probably be next year. I haven't started this one yet, but it will be set in a real place that was a retirement home for old actors, and it's set in Rottingdean, which is a village really near where I live. I live in Saltdean, just outside Brighton, and Rottingdean is nearby. And there's this sort of mock Tudor hotel there that was very popular with ex-actors, but it won't be. Mephisto's not quite old enough to be in there yet, so he won't be in there. But it's only a very sort of vague plot at the moment. But I'm thinking it'd be quite interesting to explore the idea of these old musical stars, being in a retirement home, a bit like there was a series on the radio a little bit like that, but I find that sort of quite interesting. It's an interesting. There's a place in Italy, isn't there, where old opera singers retire?
Yeah.
I think, wow.
There was the Quartet film with
yes, that's right. Yeah. And have you read, Alex? Have you read Richard Osman's new book, the Thursday Murder Club?
Not yet. I'll have to look it up because he was.
Look it up. It's out in July, and I've just read it, and it's brilliant. But it's a similar. I'm not giving much away. It's set in a retirement home, not a retirement home, a kind of sheltered accommodation, for elderly people. But and it's really funny, as you'd imagine from Richard Osman, but quite dark as well. So look that one up.
Richard Osman, although he's been on TV a lot, he's a relatively new writer.
He is.
Yeah,
and he is, and it's a bit annoying, really, isn't it? Because he's really good at it. It's a really good book. You think, come on, Richard, you're good at everything. You have to be good at writing as well. But he seems a lovely person, actually, and it is very good.
Yeah, because I've noticed when I was doing research for one of my reviews that you also teach at a university as well, don't you?
I teach at West Dean, which is in Sussex. I teach an MA there, creative writing MA, with Leslie Thompson also teaches there. Mark Radcliffe runs the course, who's a really good writer. And I also teach on a really new thing, which is a crime writing MST at Cambridge, at the University of Cambridge. And I teach on that too, which is led by Sophie Hannah. And it's been quite an experience because, of course, Cambridge doesn't have many new courses, I think they've only taught English there since the 1920s. So for them to have a new course in crime writing is such a big thing. So it was super exciting, the first few days of the course, and all the students were in their gowns and everything, matriculating. It felt really incredible. Unfortunately, the term was really disrupted with Corona and COVID, but we're carrying on online. But it was a shame for the students because it was so much fun at first.
Yeah, I noticed that because it was a major plot point in the diary book, because she was a creative writing teacher, wasn't she?
Yeah, yes, it was. I mean, I have to say that none of my creative writing students are anything like hers. But I always think it is. I'm just interested by it. I suppose I am quite fascinated by that world because Ruth is obviously a university lecturer as well, and I've got a good friend who teaches at Portsmouth University, and she has been a really good resource for me with Ruth, because I say to her, Mary, what would Ruth be doing in June? And she says, well, she'd be doing this, lectures will be over, but she'd be doing that. So she's been really, really helpful to me. So it is a world that I find quite interesting, quite fascinating. I think Henry Kissinger said that university politics were poisonous precisely because the rewards were so small. And I thought that was very interesting. And I suppose, like a lot of writers, I'm very interested by things happening in an enclosed space. And in Stranger Diaries, obviously it's a school, and in an enclosed world, I should say. It's a school which is partly based, I have to say, on West Dean, which is where I teach, which is this most amazing old mansion in the country. So it's this incredible house, really beautiful with loads of grounds, but it was once owned by this guy who was very big in the surrealist movement. So you're walking along the corridor and there can be like suits of armor and dead animals, which unfortunately are everywhere. And then suddenly you'll find a Dali telephone, and it's, or a kind of stuffed monkey or something. It's just a very, very strange and odd and surreal place. So Stranger Diaries, the school in Stranger Diaries is partly based on that, and partly based on my own school, which was a comprehensive in Hove, but it had once been a convent, and of course it had a ghost nun. Of course it did.
Yeah. What was it like writing a ghost short story bit for the start of each? Because at the start of each chapter, there's a ghost section for that.
It was so much fun. It's probably one of the most purely fun things I've ever done as a writer, and it made me suddenly query myself, because I've always enjoyed writing because you can make people laugh and you can make people cry. But then I realized that I actually do quite enjoy scaring people. And when my kids were little, I used to tell them a story, in fact, which was the basis for the story in the Stranger Diaries, and they remember it really well, and it's quite a good memory for them. But I do remember they had some friends round, and I told their friends this story, and one of the friends didn't sleep for a week after it, so I felt really terrible. So I do like a good ghost story. Like a lot of us, I love those Victorian ghost stories, like M.R. James or even Henry James. About the name James, where at the beginning, you're all round the fire and they say, shall I tell you about the terrible happenings? And you think, oh yeah, do, yeah.
What as a writer would scare you, and what would you never write about?
Oh, Alex, that's a really good question. I mean, I think I do think that writers, can write about anything, and it just depends how you do it. And crime writers, I think, are very good at actually tackling really difficult subjects with, in a very responsible way. So I do think that's something that the crime writing world is good at. For myself, what wouldn't I write about? I probably wouldn't write about a child killer. I probably wouldn't, though I have written about it in a way in my books, but I probably wouldn't write about it in huge detail. I probably would never kill another animal because people get so upset about that. So I probably wouldn't ever do that. But in theory, I like to think, I suppose, that it's not what you write about, it's how you do it. So, there can be really terrible things, but as long as you approach them responsibly and show the point of view of the victim as well, which I think is really important. So, I hope there wouldn't. What would really scare me? What scares me? I suppose, like everything, what really scares me, something happening to one of my children. So I think, that would be the thing that would scare me the most.
What I'm going to do now, I don't know whether you can see the comments, Elly.
I saw a couple, but I haven't seen any for a while. So,
is there anybody that wants to write a question that I've not asked yet? I haven't asked anything from the comments because I'm dyslexic and can't read them. Sorry, but if anyone wants to write, right.
Oh, I see something.
Yeah.
Do the things that happen to your characters ever surprise you? Well, that's a really good question. Yes, I mean, I suppose like a lot of people, I used to feel very impatient with people who said, "Oh, I don't know what happened. The characters just decided to do it." But actually, it does happen sometimes, and particularly in the House at Sea's End, there's something that Cathbad does that really did surprise me. I hadn't planned it at all, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, he's going to do that," and then he did it. So sometimes it does happen, yeah. And I think that what happens is really that if you think, "Oh my gosh, they couldn't do that," then perhaps you should let them do that.
Yeah, very, very interesting. The House at Sea's End is quite early in the series.
Yes, number 3. You shouldn't really have favourites, but it is one of my favourites. I see a question there. It says, and I haven't got my glasses on. It says, "Is lockdown a good place to write?" For me, it has been quite good. Partly, as I did say early on, it's me escaping having to do too much housework. I can gallop up to the shed and write there. But, it is because normally, like a lot of writers these days, I do lots of travelling around. Last year, I did over 60 events, so that's more than one a week. And I can be in Glasgow, and I did a tour in February for the Lantern Men, and I went from Norfolk to Leeds to Manchester to Glasgow to Edinburgh, which was wonderful. But it's tiring, and I'm not one who can write on the road, so I need to be back home to write. So actually, it has been quite nice for me as a writer because I've had a lot of time, and I've been able to be in my own house and write. So actually, I know lockdown is awful for a lot of people, but for me as a writer, it's been quite good.
As my research for, because you've been in Nottingham before, but I noticed you were doing a Bronte event. What was that like?
Oh my gosh, that was so lovely. So that was last year, last March. I did an event at Haworth, and I was invited by a reader who actually runs the Haworth parsonage there, and she wanted me to come and do an event because she likes the books. And so I went up there, and I don't know, have you ever been there, Alex?
Not yet, no.
Not that far from you, is it really?
No, it's not that far at all, no.
It's the most incredible place. You get there, and I was staying in a sort of B&B there, and you get there and you go into through this sort of through the graveyard, and there's the parsonage where the Brontes lived, and the birds were it was dusk, the evening was coming, there were sort of shadows, the birds, rooks I think, were cawing from the trees. It was the most atmospheric place I've ever been, and I'm a huge fan of the Brontes, and just to see their house, and we had this wonderful tour, and we were shown their little books that they used to write. And like a lot of writers, I used to write little tiny books too, so I was really excited. I said, "Oh, I used to write tiny books too," and they said, "Yeah, a lot of people say that," so it wasn't that original. But to see where they lived, these amazing sisters and the brother, who wrote these incredible books and died so young. It was just really one of the best experiences I've had, really. It was wonderful. Oh, I see somebody has asked a really good question, but hard to answer. Where do your ideas come from? Well, for me, as you probably guessed from my description of Haworth there, a lot of my ideas come from places. Quite often with a book will start with the place. So the first Ruth book, which is called The Crossing Places, started when I was walking across Titchwell Marsh with my husband Andy, who's an archaeologist. And I'm sorry, Alex, you've heard this before, but Andy made this comment about marshland being sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between. Prehistoric people thought of it as a link to the afterlife. So neither land nor sea, neither life nor death, an in between place, a kind of liminal zone. And that immediately gave me the idea for the crossing places. So it's usually the place that gives me the idea, particularly for the Ruth books. But other things, my family history has been quite important to me, as I was saying about my mum being the influence for the Justice books, but also my granddad's life as an actor has really been the inspiration for the Stevens and Mephisto books. So family history generally, but also places. You know, I was at Lincoln Castle and I saw the old prison there, and that gave me the idea for the Outcast Dead. And I remember seeing an old airfield in Norfolk, and that gave me the idea for the Ghost Fields. So particularly, it seems for those Ruth books, it's a place that gives me the idea first.
I've got a little story about Lincoln Prison, actually, because I got stuck in it and broke my chair.
No!
Because I went to Lincoln University and I broke the lights on the side of my chair because it was too wide to get out the doors. Yeah.
So were you stuck in there?
I managed to get out, but not without breaking the lights first.
Oh no!
Yeah.
But it's an amazing place, isn't it, Lincoln Castle? Because
it is wonderful. Yeah.
It's this old medieval castle, but it was a prison as well, and the prison I found, just because it was run under something called the separate system, which, gosh, is a bit like social distancing, isn't it? Where people were not allowed to be close to each other, and they had to be separate all the time, and it did drive them mad. I don't want to go further into that, but I just found that the strangest thing. Question that's come up the screen is, when are you coming back to Norfolk? As soon as I can, as soon as all this is over, I'll be back in Norfolk. Hopefully I'll be back there for February, when my next Ruth book's out. The next question is, would lockdown, sorry, I'm going to leave it. Would lockdown provide a good background for a crime story? Really good. I think really good. Whether I'd write it. But funnily enough, Peter May, who you know, Alex, don't you? Peter May,
yeah.
Who is a really good crime writer, fellow Quercus author. 15 years ago, I think it was 15 years ago, he wrote a book called Lockdown. And it was about a crime happening in London, which was locked down in quarantine. And I think, I could be wrong, I think it wasn't published at the time because people thought that was too strange. You know, how could that happen? And of course, now it's coming out. Now it's being published. And this is a book Peter wrote 15 years ago. And it's, you know, I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I think all writers are probably thinking, you know, this is a really interesting subject, but of course we don't want to make capital out of something that is a terrible tragedy for so many people. You know, so many people. So I think all writers, possibly, or crime writers maybe, are having this thought with themselves, thinking to themselves, well, it is really interesting. And I think Peter's book really does focus on the idea of solving a crime in lockdown, which I think is really, really interesting. Yeah, I think it would be a really good subject for a crime novel. Whether I'd write it, I don't know. Funnily enough, though, Ruth 13, which I'm writing at the moment, there is a deadly virus in it. And that actually is not a modern thing at all. It comes from the theory that when Bronze Age people, when the Beaker people came to Britain from some Middle Europe, so the Bronze Age people arrived, and 90% of the indigenous Neolithic people died. Their DNA just goes, it just disappears. So either there was a terrible genocide, but what people think really is that there was a deadly virus. So it's not a new thing really. So that does come into Ruth 13, but I have dialed it back a little bit in the current situation because I don't want it to seem like I'm, you know, getting any inspiration from the current event. Disappeared, but there was a question about, would Ruth and Nelson ever end up in lockdown together? Well, the current book is set in 2019, so it's before this, but I wouldn't disregard that happening. I wouldn't rule that out.
Fascinating. Just going back to the Peter May thing, have you got a book that you've got in the annals somewhere that you might go back to?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, you know, my first book that I wrote when I was 11 was a crime novel, and it was called The Hair of the Dog, which must have been something my parents talked about a bit. So it's called The Hair of the Dog, and it was set in Rottingdean, which I said is kind of the village next door to mine. And it's about a group of young people who live in they feel that they live in a very boring place. and in order to get media interest in the place they live, they stage a fake murder. Which, to be honest, I don't think is a bad plot for an 11-year-old. The book itself is no good at all, but it's not a bad plot. So I might go back to that, maybe for a short story one day. But yeah, we've all got stuff in the... So there's a question that's come up here which says, how hard is it to balance the light-hearted elements of your novels with the darkness? And I think that was another question that I saw earlier on, because I think it's true to say that perhaps my books have a little bit of lightheartedness in them. I hope so, anyhow. When people say to me, oh, I read your book and it made me laugh, I really like that. You know, really, really like to think I make people laugh. And, you know, Mick Herron, who's a writer I really love, he always makes me laugh out loud, you know. Leslie Thompson's books are very funny in places, you know. I like that in a book. And I think I think in a way you naturally know when to make a joke and when to dial back from a joke. But sometimes I do like mixing it up a little bit. And I always think, the example I always think of is Macbeth, which is, sorry to say Macbeth, maybe I shouldn't say it, the Scottish play, you know what I mean. Anyhow, in the Scottish play, there's this bit where, you know, it's this terrible night and Duncan's been killed, and a messenger comes in, I think it's Lennox, and he says, oh, you know, Macbeth says, what's been going on? Lennox says, it's the most terrible night. There's thunder and lightning. All the horses are eating each other. It's terrible portents. They're all omens and everything. And Macbeth says, aye, 'twas a rough night. And I think that's meant to be funny. So I think sometimes at a moment of great stress, you can have a little joke like that. And I think it can work. Obviously, Shakespeare knew how to make it work. The porter as well in the Scottish play is very funny. Question here is, do you think there's a chance your books could be televised? Well, you know, like a lot of writers, I'm kind of torn by that, really. To answer the first bit of the question is that a TV company does have an option on the books. So there is a TV company who's working right now to try and make a TV series out of them. But this has happened to me before. This is the third time this has happened. So I'm not sort of holding my breath now, really. But I suppose I think maybe a lot of readers certainly would feel like this, and a lot of writers too, is that part of me would love to see them on television. Of course I would. You know, it'd be really interesting to see somebody else's vision. And, you know, the baser part of me would think, you know, it'd be nice to earn lots of money, which you would. But the other part of me thinks, you know, we're readers, aren't we? And I know you love Audible books and the words in your head. And the pictures are there in our heads, aren't they? And I do worry about seeing something that's not my Ruth and my Nelson. So I am a bit torn in a way. But somebody has said, who would play Ruth? And what about
I was just about to say that. Whoever said that in the audience, well done.
Yeah, you're on the same wavelength. I've always thought there's an actress called Ruth Jones, who I always think would be a really good Ruth. She looks like the Ruth in my head. She's a really good actress. Eve Miles as well, I think could do Ruth, could be really good. Now Nelson, I've always thought that in my head Nelson looks like a young Ted Hughes, and somebody put a picture of him. If it was my publicist, put a picture of him on Twitter recently, and it was just my Nelson, really. And the actor who looks a lot like that is Richard Armitage. So he would be my Nelson. If my friend Lynn Sparl is listening, hi Lynn. I know she does not agree with that. She thinks it should be Brendan Coyle, who is a really good actor. But somebody said Stevens and Mephisto. I'd love to see them on television. I really would. I think in a way they might be even better to be on TV. Matthew Good could play Edgar. Haven't we thought about Max? Let me know, guys, if you think of a good Max. Good question here now. Do you get nerves before publication? Are you used to it now? No, Melanie, no, Mel. I still get really nervous, and it gets worse with each book, I think. In a way, particularly with Ruth, because a lot of, you know, and it's a wonderful thing, and I'm really grateful for it. A lot of people really like Ruth and have a lot sort of invested in her. So I always fear that, you know, I hope that the book is going to be the book they want as well as the book I want to write. So, and that might not always be the same case, because a writer can only write the book they want. So that is always something that you worry about. So Postscript Murders, which you've so beautifully put up there, that's out in October. And again, I'll be nervous about that because that's a new thing. You know, it's a new project. So actually, I honestly think it gets worse, really. And I remember Val McDermott saying this to me when I was a new writer, and she'd written, 20, 30 books. I can't remember how many she's written now. And she's incidentally always been lovely to me and a real mentor and really lovely. She said, it just gets worse. And she was right.
Mm-hmm. The Postscript Murders, you've written two, and you said it's not likely to, but people have asked me, would that be a series? And yeah.
Well, I don't think it will be a series like the Ruth books are a series, but a lot of my good friends like David Gilchrist, I know he likes Harbinder. I think what it might be is a series of kind of standalone books, so with different characters each time, but with Harbinder investigating them. So it might be different from the Ruth books or the Stevens and Mephisto books, in that you're not. It would be a sort of a new cast of characters each time, but maybe Harbinder would be the detective. I don't know.
Yeah, because she was there in the Stranger Diaries, but she wasn't a big part, was she?
No, she wasn't one of the. She was one of the main characters, but she wasn't the main character. It's not like a Ruth book. It's not a Harbinder book. But I think a couple of other Sophie Hannah in her Culver Valley series, she does that in that it's a different book each time, but there's the same detective. So maybe somebody says, "Do I read my reviews?" I don't read my Amazon reviews really. It's not something that I'm sort of superstitious about, but I just feel that you can get sucked into a black hole, and a bad review does really, really upset me, I have to say. So I don't read those. I do read if I'm reviewed in one of the papers, because you can't really get away from it, because your publicist will immediately send it to you. But mostly people have been lovely, and I've had some lovely reviews, and I absolutely really do appreciate people who take the trouble to leave a review. It means a lot. And Alex, you've been huge support, and you've reviewed so many of my books, and I'm really grateful.
Yeah, I've been reviewing for 6 years now, and I think Elly is probably the biggest number of books I've gone through since I started the site.
That's nice. That's nice. Well, your reviews are becoming better and better known, aren't they? And I've seen more and more people quoting them, so that's great.
Yeah, that feels really good to know that, because I'm not aware of who's been quoting ones, but it was really nice for Val to use one of my quotes for a New Blood panel. That was 3 years ago. It was a bit of a shock, because I wasn't expecting it.
And she said that you were an influencer, and you are, so we are really grateful.
Thanks for that. That's great. It's nice to know that, I'm out there.
I think writers are always going to appreciate a reviewer who really takes the time to read the book and to say something about it. Sometimes people say, I remember Barry Forshaw, who's been really lovely about my books. In one of my books, he said, Elly uses the sea as a metaphor for human unkindness. And I thought, do I? Well, I'm happy to say that I do. Thank you, Barry. That was a lovely thing to say. So, if somebody says something, that thoughtful and that poetic, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm just really pleased to have done it, because Elly doesn't know this yet, but this is the first live interview I've ever done, so yay.
Oh, well, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Oh, I'm going to, hold on a second. Have we got any time? I'm going to...
Hello.
There's Gus.
Hello, Gus. Very cute there.
No, I'm going to put him back. I thought you might just want to see him before the end of the interview. No, it's been great, Alex. It's been really nice. You always prepare so well. I think that's what makes you such a good interviewer.
Well, I did try. I think we've got 2 minutes, so if anyone's got a really burning question they want to ask, please do.
Oh, what would you do if you weren't a writer? That's a good one. Do you have a secret fantasy job? Before I was a writer, I was an editor. I edited children's books. for HarperCollins, and I loved that. So the sort of boring answer is I probably would have just carried on doing that and would have loved it. But do you know, it might not be a surprise to Alex having seen my play, but secretly, deep down, I would have liked to be an actress. There's a little bit of me that would have liked to act. So that's my secret ambition.
Yeah, you weren't bad in the other one with Lee Child either.
Oh, no, I had a part in that play. Yes, I really enjoyed that. And recently I've done a couple of plays with some of my Brighton friends, with Graham Bartlett and William and Colette Macbeth, and I have really enjoyed those. So I can't say that I'm a very good actor, but my granddad was an actor, as I was saying, so maybe it is in the blood a bit, but I do really... So if the Ruth books ever came on TV, I'd be like Alfred Hitchcock. I'd insist on appearing in the background.
Yeah, a bit like the Morse writer. He's in every one of them, isn't it?
Colin Dexter.
Yeah. Colin Dexter.
Yeah. Except I'd probably ruin it by overacting. I'd be there in the background going, oh.
Thank you so much for this, Elly. It's been a great hour. Thank you.
Thank you. It's whizzed past. Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone who has sent in questions and everything. It's been really good fun.
I think.
And thank you for reading my books.
No problem at all. I love it. I love them. Yeah.
Thank you.